The United States Army's newest service rifle, the long-awaited replacement for the M4 Carbine, was supposed to represent the future of American infantry. It was given the name M7 rifle. Sleek, powerful, and designed with cutting-edge technology, the M7 fires a new round that promises greater lethality and improved range. It was hailed as the next big leap in small arms for U.S. forces. But just recently, the M7 was unexpectedly pulled from one of the Pentagon's most trusted independent testing programs, known as the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation, or DOT&E. This decision has raised serious eyebrows across the defense world. After all, DOT&E is not some optional bureaucracy. It exists because past mistakes with U.S. weapons cost both money and lives. And now the Army's flagship small arms program, the very rifle expected to define the next generation of close combat, is stepping away from that independent oversight. Why? What does it mean for the future of the rifle? And most importantly, what does it mean for the soldiers who will be carrying this weapon into battle? That's the story we're unpacking today. Welcome back to the Military Doc. Grab a seat because this story is about much more than just a rifle. It's about history repeating itself, about lessons learned the hard way, and about the fine line between innovation and risk when it comes to arming America's soldiers. From M16 to M4 to M7, a history of shifts. To understand why the M7 matters so much, we need to take a step back in time. The U.S. military has always struggled with the trade-offs of infantry weapons, and the last two major rifle transitions, the shift to the M16 in the 1960s and to the M4 in the 1990s, both carried lessons that directly echo today's situation. In the 1950s, American soldiers carried the M14, a powerful 7.62 by 51 millimeter battle rifle. It was accurate, hard-hitting, and traditional in design, but heavy and difficult to manage in automatic fire. Then came the jungles of Vietnam. In that environment, lighter weapons with higher rates of fire proved more useful than sheer power. The Army switched to the M16 rifle, chambered in 5.56 NATO. The idea was simple. Lighter ammunition meant troops could carry more rounds, and high-velocity bullets could cause devastating wounds at medium ranges. But the transition was a disaster. Early M16 rifles were rushed into combat without proper testing or training. They were prone to jamming, especially in Vietnam's humid climate. Many soldiers died clutching a weapon that had failed them in the middle of a firefight. Photos of cleaning rods jammed into rifles as soldiers desperately tried to clear malfunctions remain some of the most haunting images of that war. Fast forward to the 1990s, and the Army introduced the M4 Carbine, a shorter, lighter version of the M16. The M4 became the iconic rifle of the global war on terror. From the streets of Baghdad to the mountains of Afghanistan, American troops carried it everywhere. But over time, cracks appeared. The 5.56 NATO round that had once been considered revolutionary started to show its age. Against enemies wearing modern body armor, its effectiveness declined. The lack of range also became a concern, especially in Afghanistan, where insurgents engaged U.S. forces from distances beyond the effective reach of the M4. This set the stage for the M7 rifle, designed not just as an upgrade but as a transformation. Instead of prioritizing volume of fire like the M16 and M4, the M7 shifts focus back toward power and penetration. It uses a new caliber, 6.8 by 51 millimeter, that is heavier and more lethal, especially against armored targets. It also pairs with advanced optics, including a fire control system that uses sensors and ballistic calculators to improve accuracy at longer ranges. This isn't just a new rifle. It's the Army's biggest small arms shift since Vietnam. And that's exactly why the decision to pull it from independent testing is stirring so much debate. What makes the M7 different? Let's talk about what the M7 actually brings to the table. At first glance, it looks like a modern assault rifle. Sleek design, modular rails, suppressor ready, and built for adaptability. But its differences run deeper. The 6.8 by 51 millimeter cartridge is the core of its design. This round was developed to punch through modern ballistic armor, the kind that adversaries like Russia and China are equipping their troops with. Where 5.56 often fails to penetrate at range, the 6.8 is built to deliver both stopping power and extended reach. In simple terms, it's supposed to allow US soldiers to hit harder from farther away. But there's a catch. Bigger rounds mean more weight. Soldiers can't carry as many of them. That means accuracy becomes even more important. Enter the next-generation fire control optic, a smart sighting system that does more than just magnify. It includes onboard computers, rangefinders, and sensors to calculate the perfect shot. The goal is to make every round count, compensating for the reduced ammo load. In concept, the M7 is not just a rifle, but part of a package. The M250 light machine gun, firing the same 6.8mm cartridge, is designed to replace the aging M249 SAW. Together, they form the backbone of the next-generation squad weapons NGSW program. On paper, this sounds revolutionary. A rifle and machine gun combo firing a powerful new cartridge, equipped with smart optics, giving US troops the edge in lethality. But weapons don't fight wars on paper. They fight them in mud, sand, snow, and chaos. That's where independent testing matters most. And that's why pulling the M7 from DOT&E oversight has triggered alarm bells. Why DOT&E exists. To understand the controversy, we need to understand the role of DOT&E. The Director of Operational Test and Evaluation was created by Congress in the early 1980s for a very specific reason: to make sure the US military never repeated the mistakes of Vietnam-era weapons procurement. Back then, weapons were often rushed into service without proper testing, resulting in catastrophic failures. The M16 was just the most infamous example, but there were others: vehicles, aircraft, and systems that looked great in labs or manufacturer demonstrations, but crumbled in the field. Congress decided enough was enough. DOT&E was established as an independent watchdog, tasked with putting new systems through rigorous, realistic tests before they reached frontline troops. Unlike the Army's internal testing programs, DOT&E doesn't answer to the service branches or to contractors. Its reports go directly to Congress and the public. That independence is crucial because it means DOT&E can say, without political pressure, whether a system is truly ready or not. Over the decades, DOT&E has flagged issues in almost every major weapons program: the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the V-22 Osprey, the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, and countless missile defense systems. Sometimes its warnings were ignored. Sometimes they forced costly redesigns. But in nearly every case, DOT&E's oversight improved the final product, saved lives, or prevented even bigger disasters. So when the Army announced that the M7 would no longer be under DOT&E oversight, people noticed. Not just because it was one program among 100 removed, but because of what the M7 represents. This is the rifle that soldiers will literally put their lives on every single day. If any weapon deserves independent scrutiny, it's this one. The Army's explanation. When news first broke that the M7 was pulled from DOT&E oversight, the Army's public explanation was carefully worded. Officials said it was part of a broader streamlining effort to speed up acquisitions and reduce bureaucracy. The idea, they argued, was that the Army already had rigorous internal testing processes. In their view, adding DOT&E oversight on top of that only slowed down fielding, creating unnecessary delays. They also pointed out that the Army had already begun limited fielding of the M7, issuing the rifle to units like the 101 Airborne Division for early trials. According to the Army, feedback from these soldiers would provide more practical data than additional DOT&E reports. In other words, the Army's position is this: they don't want bureaucratic redundancy. They trust their own testing and evaluation process. They want to get the rifle into soldiers' hands faster. On the surface, that sounds reasonable. Nobody wants to delay modernization. But when it comes to weapons procurement, history shows that speed often comes at a cost. And critics say this is exactly the kind of situation DOT&E was designed to prevent. The watchdogs pushback. Almost immediately, defense watchdog groups and lawmakers began to push back. The nonprofit Project on Government Oversight, POGO, which has a long history of monitoring defense spending and procurement, called the decision deeply concerning. Their argument was simple. Independent oversight is the only way to ensure that weapons are truly combat-ready and safe for soldiers. They pointed to the Army's own history. Time and again, the service has declared new systems ready, only to discover major flaws once they were deployed. Without an independent check, critics argue, the Army could be repeating the same mistakes, this time with a rifle that every infantryman will carry. Even within the Pentagon, there's quiet discomfort. DOT&E has built its reputation over decades by refusing to sugarcoat results. Its reports often embarrass the services, but they also prevent costly and deadly mistakes. To see the Army sideline DOT&E for one of its most high-profile programs sends a troubling signal that the service doesn't want bad news, even if that news could save lives. Lessons from past failures. To really understand why people are so concerned, let's revisit some famous case studies in weapons procurement, where independent testing, or the lack of it, made all the difference. The M16 in Vietnam. We already touched on this earlier, but it bears repeating. The M16's failures in Vietnam were not just technical, they were cultural. The Army dismissed early reports of problems, insisting the rifle was fine. Soldiers on the ground knew otherwise. By the time the truth was undeniable, lives had already been lost. DOT&E was created to ensure that kind of denial never happened again. The Bradley fighting vehicle. In the 1980s, the Bradley fighting vehicle became the subject of a congressional scandal. Early versions were dangerously underarmed and vulnerable, but internal Army reports glossed over the flaws. It wasn't until independent investigations, both from Congress and later DOT&E, that the full truth came out. The Bradley was eventually redesigned into a capable vehicle, but only after outside pressure forced the Army's hand. The F-35 Lightning II. More recently, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter faced years of criticism from DOT&E. Issues with software, maintenance, and combat readiness were flagged again and again. Supporters of the program accused DOT&E of being too harsh, but nearly every problem it highlighted eventually proved real. The program is still flying today, but it would be in far worse shape if DOT&E hadn't kept the pressure on. These examples highlight one consistent truth. Without independent oversight, the services are often tempted to downplay or ignore problems, not because they're malicious, but because of institutional pressure. Generals want programs to succeed. Contractors want contracts to continue. Politicians want jobs in their districts. Soldiers, however, want only one thing: weapons they can trust. The soldier's perspective. Imagine being a young infantry soldier, fresh out of training, deployed overseas. Your rifle is not just another piece of gear, it is your lifeline. Every time you step outside the wire, you're betting your life that your weapon will fire when you need it to, hit what you aim at, and keep firing even after being dragged through dust, mud, and rain. For the soldier, it doesn't matter how sleek the rifle looks in a PowerPoint presentation. What matters is whether it works when everything is going wrong. Will the optic hold zero after being dropped? Will the bolt cycle when it's clogged with sand? Will the suppressor overheat after a sustained firefight? These are not academic questions. They are life and death realities. Some soldiers who have had early exposure to the M7 have already voiced concerns. Reports surfaced about the rifle's weight, especially when combined with the suppressor and advanced optic. The 6.8mm ammunition, while powerful, is heavier than 5.56, meaning soldiers can carry fewer rounds. In close combat, that trade-off could be the difference between life and death. These concerns don't necessarily mean the M7 is a bad rifle. Every weapon has trade-offs, but they do highlight why rigorous independent testing is non-negotiable. Soldiers need to know that when they shoulder the M7, it's not just the Army's word backing it, it's the judgment of an independent watchdog whose only mission is truth. The strategic context. It's also important to zoom out and see the bigger picture. The M7 rifle isn't being developed in a vacuum. It's part of a broader shift in U.S. military planning, driven by the recognition that future wars may not look like Iraq or Afghanistan. For 2 decades, U.S. forces fought insurgents and terrorists who rarely wore body armor and often engaged at close range. In that environment, the M4 and 5.56 NATO performed adequately. But now, the Pentagon is preparing for the possibility of conflict against near-peer adversaries, countries like Russia or China. These adversaries equip their troops with modern armor and longer-range weapons. That's why the M7 matters. Its 6.8mm round is specifically designed to defeat body armor at ranges where 5.56 fails. The advanced optic is designed to help U.S. troops engage at distances where they might otherwise be outgunned. In a clash with a well-equipped adversary, these advantages could mean survival. But here's the irony. The more important a weapon is to future strategy, the more crucial independent testing becomes. If the M7 fails in the field, not against insurgents, but against Russian or Chinese soldiers, the consequences would be catastrophic. The Army's argument that DOT&E slows things down misses the point. A few months of delay in testing is a small price compared to the cost of discovering flaws in the middle of a high-intensity war. The logistics problem. One of the least glamorous but most important aspects of any new weapon system is logistics. It doesn't matter how revolutionary a rifle looks on paper. If the supply chain can't keep it fed, maintained, and repaired, it becomes a liability. Here's the first big logistical hurdle for the M7: ammunition. The 6.8 by 51mm cartridge is brand new. Unlike 5.56 NATO, which is produced worldwide and stocked in massive quantities, the 6.8 has no established global supply chain. That means the U.S. must not only produce enough ammunition for training and combat, but also build the factories, storage facilities, and transport networks to support it. Soldiers on deployment need millions of rounds for practice alone, long before they fire a single shot in combat. Shifting from 5.56 to 6.8 is not just a change of caliber, it's a wholesale overhaul of how the Army supplies its frontline units. And this isn't cheap. Early estimates suggest the 6.8mm cartridge costs significantly more to produce than 5.56. In an era of tight defense budgets, that matters. Then there's the issue of compatibility. NATO allies still overwhelmingly use 5.56. For decades, one of the strengths of the alliance has been ammunition commonality. If a U.S. unit runs low, it can resupply from a British, German, or French stockpile, and vice versa. With the M7 and 6.8mm, that advantage disappears. Unless NATO partners also adopt the round, which is far from guaranteed, American troops may find themselves operating on a logistical island. Finally, consider the weight problem. Each 6.8 round is heavier than a 5.56. Add in a suppressor and advanced optic, and the M7 becomes noticeably heavier than the M4. Soldiers already carry more weight than ever before. Armor, radios, batteries, drones, night vision, water, rations. Adding even a few pounds can push a soldier past the threshold of endurance on long patrols. So while the M7 promises battlefield advantages, it also carries logistical and physical costs that must be carefully weighed. Independent testing could have illuminated these issues in detail, but without DOT&E oversight, many of these concerns remain clouded in uncertainty. Possible outcomes. So where does this leave us? The story of the M7 could unfold in several ways. Scenario 1. The M7 succeeds. It's entirely possible that the Army's confidence is justified. The rifle may prove reliable, the optics may function as advertised, and soldiers may adapt to the heavier ammunition. If that happens, the M7 could become a defining success story, a weapon that prepares the Army for near-peer warfare and redefines the future of small arms. Scenario 2. Growing pains. More likely, the M7 will face a rocky start. Most new weapons do. Early reports of weight issues, ammo shortages, or optic failures could spark controversy, but with time and adjustments, the system might stabilize. The question is, how many of those problems could have been identified earlier? saving time and money if DOT&E had been involved. Scenario 3. A costly failure. The nightmare scenario is that the M7 becomes another cautionary tale, remembered alongside the M16's early failures. If the rifle proves unreliable in combat, or if the logistics of 6.8 ammunition collapse under real-world stress, the Army may find itself stuck with a weapon that costs billions but fails to deliver. Soldiers would suffer the most, carrying a rifle that overpromised and under-delivered. The truth is, none of these outcomes are set in stone. The path the M7 takes will depend not only on the weapon itself, but on the willingness of the Army and Congress to confront problems honestly. And that's where independent testing would have mattered most. The political dimension. We can't talk about the M7 without acknowledging the political landscape. Weapons programs in the United States are not just military decisions, they're also economic and political ones. The M7 is produced by Sig Sauer, a major firearms manufacturer with deep political ties. The company won the Next Generation Squad weapons contract in 2022, beating out other industry giants like Textron and General Dynamics. That victory was a huge financial win, not just for Sig Sauer, but for the congressional districts hosting its factories. That means jobs, contracts, and lobbying power are all wrapped up in the future of the M7. When billions of dollars and thousands of jobs are at stake, the pressure to declare a program successful becomes overwhelming. History shows that once a program reaches a certain scale, it becomes politically untouchable, even if problems arise. This dynamic adds another layer of risk. Without independent oversight, political and financial incentives could overshadow operational realities. The Army may feel pressure to push the M7 forward no matter what, even if soldiers in the field are raising red flags. Looking backward, looking forward. If there's one lesson from history, it's this. The U.S. military has often learned the hard way that rushing new weapons to the field without proper testing leads to disaster. The M16 in Vietnam, the early Bradley, the endless struggles of the F-35. In each case, problems were downplayed until they could no longer be ignored. The M7 doesn't have to repeat those mistakes. It may very well prove to be a capable, even revolutionary weapon. But that will depend not only on its design, but on the honesty of the system evaluating it. Independent oversight isn't about slowing things down. It's about making sure soldiers don't pay the price for institutional optimism. And that's why the decision to pull the M7 from DOT&E oversight matters so much. This isn't just about one rifle. It's about trust. Trust between the Army and its soldiers, between the military and Congress, and between the United States and its allies. So where does that leave us? The M7 rifle represents both promise and peril. On one hand, it offers real advantages: greater lethality, advanced optics, and the potential to keep U.S. soldiers dominant on the battlefield of tomorrow. On the other, it carries risks: logistical burdens, heavier weight, higher costs, and now, the absence of independent oversight. History suggests that when optimism collides with reality, soldiers are the ones caught in the middle. That's why independent testing exists, to make sure the weapons our troops carry into battle are more than just promises on paper. The Army insists the M7 is ready. Critics say more oversight is essential. The truth? Only time and the battlefield will decide. And maybe that's the sobering lesson here. In the end, a rifle is not just steel and polymer. It's a contract between a nation and its soldiers. A promise that when the worst day comes, their weapon will not fail them. Whether the M7 keeps that promise is a question we all have a stake in answering.